should. Time. I've been working on this idea for the last 3 years. Paper filter preparation. Now, each one of us believe that the reason we are rinsing the paper filter is to make sure that we take out that papery taste. But about 2 years ago, by accident, I brewed the coffee with a wet paper filter and also dry paper filter. And I actually did not find that I'm getting papery flavors in this cup comparing with my wet one. And this gave me the idea to actually dig really deep into the different paper filter preparations and also different qualities of paper filters. And I realized that back in the days, this was needed in order to rinse the paper filter because the quality of paper filters were not to the right level. So I started testing so many different paper filters to actually see which ones will give me no papery taste. And I came across to quite a few of them. Two favorites of the ones that I've been using for the last 3 years is the Cafec as well as the Hario paper filter. Now, please bear in mind that I'm not being sponsored by these companies. I'm sure there's so many other paper filters that are great, but they are the ones that I've settled in that I really enjoy. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make 3 preparations of 3 coffees, same coffee but different paper filter preparation. So I'm using a Cafec today. The first coffee is pre-rinsed. Second coffee, I've rinsed it and let it dry overnight. So we can see the shape of the coffee is perfectly fitting to this cone. And the third coffee is just dry paper filter, which I've taken just from the bag. And then we can see that shape is not the best. So let's go. As we can see, as we are brewing in the wet paper filter, color is still the same. We don't really see the brown color on top. It's very whitish, while the middle one is representing very yellow color. So behavior of these filters is giving us quite a bit of difference. And the very last one is a yellow color, but even has a lot of brown color patches on the side. So visually they look very different. So on the top, we can clearly see that there's not much brown color, just a little bit on the side, and the paper filter maintains its same color as originally. The second one, where we've done dry and wet, you can see a lot of yellow colors, and the color, even on the top, that coffee has not really touched this side of the filter, but all of the aroma volatiles have escaped on the paper on the sides of the filter, and it has given us this yellow color. Completely dry paper filter, it's still yellow, but on the sides we can see a little bit more of the brown colors. All right, so before we have a taste, just quickly about the recipe. I've used 18 grams in, 217 grams out. Coffee I used today is a Kenyan Maguta anaerobic natural process. Let's have a taste. So for me, it's very creamy, balanced, round, lovely citrus notes, milk chocolate, lovely Kenyan coffee. Some grapefruit at the end, wet and dry paper filter. So for this coffee, I still have that, lovely lactic, lovely creaminess, hint of chamomile, like yellow florals. Florals are definitely more dominant in this coffee, which I could not actually see in this cup. And the dry paper filter. So structure-wise, very similar coffee to wet paper filter, but hint more berry notes. These beautiful, jammy, classic sort of purple characters that we get, they're a little bit more obvious here, where I could not really see them in the first cup. What I can say for sure is that I'm not tasting any papery notes in these coffees. And if I'm gonna pick which one would possibly be a little bit more dry, a bit less balanced, I'd say for this particular coffee would be this cup. While these 2 coffees would would have a long aftertaste, sweet aftertaste. And I found that with a lot of anaerobic coffees, a lot of heavier carbonic maceration coffees, that my personal preference was always dry wet paper filter, or also dry paper filter comparing with the wet filter. And for some of the wash coffees, often it's mixed bag, and often I would prefer the wet paper filter. But what this is telling me and has told us after tasting hundreds and hundreds of experiments, number one is that why we originally wanted to rinse the paper filter in order to take out that papery taste, I'm not seeing it. At least I'm not seeing it with the 2 paper filters that I have recommended and selected. Secondly, it's also telling us that the way we extract these coffees, the way we behave, we see different tendencies in the flavor profile. And for me, that's exciting, because not only we can use the different temperatures or different kettles and different grind settings in order to find different expressions of the coffees. Now, I believe we can also use different preparation of paper filters to help us to pick the cup that we like. For me, my favorite one is this middle one today. So after tasting so many different coffees with a wet and dry paper filter, and really as a barista understanding their differences, I really wanted to find out more and scientifically to understand why do we have such a big differences in these three preparations. So in order to get these answers, I reached out to Zurich University and I've asked them if they can do studies on differences of paper filter preparations. So firstly, we've decided to run the very similar experiment with the rinsed paper filter, like the very first coffee we've tasted, unrinsed, and then rinsed and dried. We've decided to use the coffee that's very common coffee for many of us that we love, Ethiopian natural process coffee, and the brewing protocol is what we call Alex brew method. So it's 18 grams in, 270 grams out. First pour we go 50 grams, 70 grams, 50 grams, 50 grams and 50 grams. Now the most important thing about these studies were to actually understand the intensity of aroma volatiles that we actually managed to get in these three coffees, because we have clearly tasted the differences in these coffees. We did not know why and what we're gonna see in this experiment. And we also wanted to see a reproductivity when we make the same coffee for a number of times, how consistent we're going to be with each particular technique. So this graph represents them testing all of the aroma volatile compounds that they found in the coffee. And what they've done is they've isolated a particular aroma volatile compound, and they wanted to see in each one of the different brews, do we get more aroma volatiles depending on the filter preparation, or do we get less aroma volatile compounds? The very first one, we can see it's a dry paper filter, and we can see that we managed to get between 1.3 to 1.4 on average of this particular aroma volatile. However, with the wet paper filter, we got a little bit more. And with the wet and dry paper filter, we got even more of the aroma volatile, of this particular aroma volatile. And the tendency goes on and on. So with the following aroma volatile, almost the same level of dry and wet condition, but a little bit more of the wet and dry. For example, this coffee here, we got dry aroma volatile, almost in the same level as the wet condition, but reproductivity or standard deviation was not as good in this coffee, so we can see possibly a bit more variance in the taste from cup to cup. However, standard deviation for wet and dry, as well as intensity of this aroma volatile, was a lot higher. So this really explains why do we see differences in these three coffees that we've tasted. And there's a lot more research to be done, and I believe that a lot more time for us to sort of spend on understanding the paper filters. But I can comfortably say is that when we vet the paper filter, we should be asking ourselves, are we vetting this paper filter because we want to take out the papery taste? And secondly, when we have different preparations of paper filters, we possibly should be looking at how are we going to encourage that flavor profile, how are we going to increase certain flavor profiles with different preparations. Bye-bye. And finally, and most importantly, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear about your experiences with different qualities of the paper filters. If you have had the opportunity to experiment with different preparations, we'd love to learn, because by sharing this information, I feel that we can go a little bit deeper in this topic together of different filter preparations, so we can continuously keep learning, progressing, striving to make better cup of coffees. Cannot wait to hear from you.